there's poverty and then there's psychological poverty, and they're
Yeah.
very different things. And
Yeah, Desolation Wilderness was my backyard. Yeah. So it's quite an interesting story. I actually grew up
oh,
in a 27-foot fifth wheel with no running water and no electricity. So kind of very Swiss Family Robinson before it was cool though. So living in a van by the river is cool now. It was not cool when I was doing it as a kid.
these days it's a lifestyle choice. Then it was poverty. Uh,
Exactly, precisely. Yes, yes.
wow. So how did all that come about? What was the sort of background of your parents that meant you lived in that way?
Yeah, so my dad actually had a very successful construction business during the height of the construction boom. And they were building tremendous amount of houses. The stock market crashed, and overnight, all of the spec homes that he had out were basically
So this
worth
was
nothing.
sort of 2008-ish or before.
This was actually the first one. So this was back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Right. Okay. Wow. Yeah.
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 And so rather than declare bankruptcy, my dad decided to sell everything we owned and pay off everyone he owed.
Okay.
So it's actually a very admirable move, but that left us literally with a trailer in the woods and a porta potty in the yard.
And how old were you then when that happened?
I was 11, so it was I was preteen, and it was definitely a very interesting time to be going through kind of all the hormonal changes and the growth spurt stuff, and be in a very small space with my two brothers and my mom and dad.
Well, because I grew up in a poor sort of family from birth, really. Sort of, my parents worked very hard, but it was they were Irish immigrants, and
Oh.
I go to school and being quite embarrassed about it all, to be honest. Couldn't get the stuff that everybody else had, and
Yeah.
I'd have hand-me-down clothes and clothes from the state and stuff like that, and I didn't really talk about it. It wasn't something that was talked about very much.
No, exactly. And so it's kind of like, shh, we have this kind of behind the scenes life, and you just zip it and go about your day. And that was definitely how it was. And it was really hard too for my mom because she actually is an incredible interior designer. And she was decorating these glamorous homes that my dad was building, and then they were selling them. And so she did make the trailer as nice as she possibly could, but it certainly was still a trailer at the end of the day. My mom used to say, you can slap lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig.
Absolutely. I'm no sayings like that, very much so.
Yeah.
And one of the things, though, that we did have growing up was very much a sense of community amongst, well, my brother and my sisters, but also there were other people that we knew
Yeah.
that were in similar situations. Was that true for you, or were you just quite isolated?
Yeah, the small town that we were actually in, a lot of people kind of didn't want to be trifled with, and they lived that way. And there's a huge sense of community. And to this day, I mean, I'm still in touch with many of the people from that town. So, it is kind of a very, it's one of those places you want to have your car break down. You know what I mean? Because there's going to be people that are going to help you.
Yeah, like myself and my brother, we ran wild as kids, but actually, I now know all the neighbors were looking out for us, but we never felt like anybody was looking out for us. So we were allowed to go wild, but there was the drums were talking and the parents were talking.
Well, I'll tell you, yes, we too ran wild through the forest. We spent a lot of time at the little airport that we had as kids. I was rarely home, right? Because we were out exploring the woods. That being said, when I got my driver's license, I once was speeding home from high school to the house. And by the time I got home, three people had called my parents to let them know. So I will say it has its benefits and its setbacks for sure.
Absolutely. And how was school for you? I found school to be a place to escape to. It was a different set of rules. I could be good and get
Yeah.
stars and
Yeah.
achieve and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I was a straight A student except for math. I hated math. I threw myself into my work, and my mom she was always a very big reader. She was always reading books, and even before I was old enough to read, she would be playing books on tape for me. So she'd set me up with a box of chicken and a biscuits and a book on tape. And so still to this day, I love learning. I love reading. I read still about a book a week. I think I've read like 600 self-help books for all the doctoral research that I did as part of, in addition to the journal work and all of that, the medical journal work. So I just can't get enough of that stuff.
you were in school, successful, achieving on the art side of things, by the
Yeah.
sounds of it, and the creative side of things.
Yeah.
You were drawn to that. Do you have siblings as well? Was it, were you the
Yeah, I have two younger brothers. My youngest brother is like 6'5", 6'6". So he towers over me. Yeah, so it's kind of funny. But they're still giving me trouble to this day, right? They love to razzle me and keep me humble.
Well,
And
doing a great job. I'm sure you don't need much humbling. I mean, you sort of, with the background that you have, I'm sure you appreciate what you've got, right? So,
absolutely
but
100%. But
one of the
just
things that, go on.
if my britches start to get too big, my brothers make sure they keep them in check.
Right. And so you enjoyed school, and you got on well. I guess you were successful there, and it was a nice break from the poverty and all that sort of stuff, which often it is, I think, you know. So, um,
Yeah. And
and
we knew we were poor. We knew we were poor, but I don't think I ever considered it. There were times where I felt disappointed that I didn't have things that other kids had.
oh,
But our life was so full
mm,
anyway
mm,
that it didn't really feel devastating all the time, right? Like it wasn't always so obvious to us. There were times when it was a little bit more on the challenging side. Sorry, I got something in my eye here. But for the most part, my dad did a great job and my mom did a great job of making sure that we had what we needed. And they, like, for example, I remember my dad brought home a bunch of scrap wood from one of his job sites, and he and my brothers built a tree house, right? So
right,
there
yeah,
were
yeah, yeah.
things that we were doing that were keeping us busy and occupied where I don't think we realized just how bad it really was. I think my parents did a great job of kind of finding the positive in what we were going through.
I mean, which is interesting because I don't want to get into this sort of toxic positive stuff because that's quite disturbing. But there is something about there's poverty and then there's psychological poverty, and they're
Yeah.
very different things. I mean, you didn't have that psychological poverty by the sounds of it. You had the opposite of that. You had quite a lot of wealth in terms of relationships and support and interesting and stimulating things to do.
I've told this story probably, I don't, 500 times because of the first book that I wrote on this upbringing. And I've never heard anybody position it that way. And I think that is probably the best framework that I have heard to describe how it really wasn't a bad thing because we had exactly, there was this psychological wealth. And I think I've never heard that term before. And I think that's really beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah, well, it does sound like that. That's the way it's coming across. Is that I think the sadness is when poverty goes into somebody's mind, and it limits their capacity to believe in themselves, uh,
Yes.
which often does happen, I think. And and some people can be born into poverty, get very wealthy, but still they're in that in terms of their experience of themselves.
Absolutely. Yes.
And we can be given a sense of bounty, I think, from an early age. If and it's I don't need to lecture about this. I think it's all about attachment and that attachment framework, that loving framework. That if we're brought up into that, we're going to be all right in the end.